We have a distinguished panel they are going to talk about agriculture and agribusiness in Afghanistan. We have USAID's top specialist in agriculture, and as many of you know, USAID has been the major backer of agriculture, and their investments these days are their major investment in Afghanistan is in agriculture. We know how important the industry is. Now, one of our distinguished companies that is a platinum sponsor, Apple Group, which has brought together members of the Agriculture and Horticultural Union to bring modernity in marketing, in promotion, in production of materials, in business development, in technology. A lot of agriculture in Afghanistan is at a fairly primitive level. And you'll be hearing, but it is full of promise, because if you go back, agriculture was primary before all the conflicts started, and Afghanistan was self-sufficient. There is so much in this Afghan market that can be provided by Afghans, and we don't have to import so much from Pakistan and other countries. So I'd like to start with presenting Mr. Zia Rasouli's presentation, Apple Group. They are a platinum sponsor. There were some problems in getting here. So I'd like to very briefly go through a couple of PowerPoint slides, picking out like the major elements of this. And you'll know something about Apple Group in trying to bring together small and medium-sized farm businesses, agribusinesses in Afghanistan, to promote them to an international investment community and to an international market. Okay, so first slide, just GDP is 20% agriculture, and the labor force is anywhere from 55% to 75%. Next slide, please. By the way, there is no stability in Afghanistan if Afghan agriculture does not prosper, because it's just too easy to go to work for insurgencies that pay you well, or the industry of poppies, which also pays well. But fruit tree crops and solid crops will pay more than poppies. All right. There are very few large firms in agribusiness, and we should note that any kind of firm with resources that goes into Afghanistan can dominate the market. And the market, the very lucrative domestic market, because things like jam and juice and basic agricultural products that are packaged, that are processed and packaged, sold in the Afghan market will dominate the market. So processing is critical. Next slide. Previous slide, then. Previous slide. Where's the processing slide? Okay, processing. Yeah, that's the key. It's processing. What does that mean? It means packaging, and it means developing expertise in bringing raw material agricultural produce into higher value-added products. And that's what Apple Group is looking to promote, how to take so much of this raw agricultural produce, get it into higher value-added products, sell them, and really sell them in the Afghan market and be successful. And they are looking for companies that are willing to invest and do this. Next slide, please. Again, and when you talk about investment in agriculture, you're talking about investment in processing and packaging, in shipping, and creating these higher value-added products. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, there are areas of concern. There is instability in the unsecured areas, but there's total stability in the secured areas. And government bureaucracy and corruption is something that we all deal with in Afghanistan, but in agriculture, it's pretty free of those kinds of constraints. The laws and regulations that we worry about in a lot of other sectors and ministries, we don't have those kind of worries. So in terms of economic governance, there's far less worries in investing in agriculture than some other sectors. There's no, anyway, the next slide, please. Companies that go and invest in agriculture and agribusiness in Afghanistan can dominate the market. And that is a message that Apple Group wants you to know. Combining with Afghan companies, of course, is the way to do it, and they can hook you up with the proper company or combination of companies. It's interesting to note that the only economic sector in the country today that's actually growing, given this transition that we see between the military donor-based economy to a more market economy, the agriculture sector is fairly healthy and growing. And it was a very effective strategy also from a point of view of political stability to counter poppy cultivation. So with that, next slide, please. In a nutshell, tremendous opportunities for safe investment right now, tremendous domestic demand and the ability to dominate the market, and major Afghan government and international donor support for the sector. Next slide, please. Apple Group, remember it? It's one way for you to get in business in Afghanistan in the agriculture sector. Thank you. So my next job is to hand over to Chris Payne. He works with USAID here in Washington, and he is agriculture expert. He has, unlike many of our bureaucrats in government agencies, he has lived the life in Afghanistan, working in Kandahar and Nangarhar, and I believe in Helmand. So without further ado, Chris Payne.
Don, thank you very much. Certainly pinch hitting at a moment's notice, so very well done. Thank you. So it's a pleasure for me to be moderating this first panel on opportunities in agriculture in Afghanistan. As Don said, my name is Chris Payne. I'm the agriculture advisor for USAID here in Washington for Afghanistan. We have a very distinguished panel I'm so glad to be moderating. My job really is to, number one, speak as little as possible to give these fine gentlemen as much time as possible, and number two, to, I think, enforce the rule of Don. They want to know what you guys are doing. And I'll get to that too. And the rule of Don is 7 minutes each for all of our panelists, which makes it very tough for them because I'm sure that, as you know and I can appreciate, they could probably speak for an hour on each one of their respective topics. So let me go without further ado. I'd like to start off in order with Gary Kuhn, and I've known Gary for quite some time. He's the president of Roots of Peace. And hold on, just have a seat real quick. I'm just going to introduce everyone real quick. So Gary's the president of Roots of Peace and has been working in Afghanistan since I think about 2004 or so. Yep. And certainly focused very much on the horticulture sector. And he's been working in value-added processing, marketing and export both to South and Central Asia as well as to the Middle East. I'm just going to finish all of our introductions. Next up, we're going to have Dr. Stephen Kwon, and Dr. Stephen Kwon is the founder and president of Nutrition and Education International. And this is a nonprofit organization that focuses very much on the establishment of a sustainable soy value chain in Afghanistan, which will assist in eradication malnutrition in Afghanistan, which, as you can well appreciate, is a very significant problem. Next up, we will have Keith Alaniz, and my apologies for mispronouncing. Keith is the co-founder and president of Rumi Spice. He's a U.S. Army veteran and has worked in Afghanistan, I believe, from 2011 to 2014, where he served as an advisor to the provincial governor of Wardak, as well as to the district governor of Syedabad district in Wardak. And last but certainly not least, Chris Svedu. He is the director of international expansion for EDI USA. And EDI USA is a global manufacturer of agricultural, security, defense, and healthcare innovations, primarily responsible for the transfer of technology projects with government agencies in about 26 different countries. So please help me in welcoming all of our fine panelists, and I will ask Gary to lead off. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk about agriculture in Afghanistan, and it is doing very well. Despite all the political instability that's going on, we have not lost any melons to Taliban shooting them. We haven't lost any grapes to bombs. The whole industry as a whole is moving ahead very well. And you want to know why it is. First, you have to eat, so it's very important the farmers are growing staple crops to feed their families. But the second reason is Afghanistan has something that few countries have, and that is the climate and the resources to grow excellent perennial crops. And the crops from Afghanistan are world class. And when you go to market those in India, it's a pleasure because you're getting premiums of 30% over other crops, other pomegranates from other countries. So you look around the world, and there's only a few places that can grow perennial crops really well. California is one of them. Turkey, Iran, and there's some other places in the Mediterranean, South Africa, parts of Australia, and Afghanistan. So you don't see really good pomegranates coming out of Dubai because they don't have a really good climate for it. So Afghanistan perennial crops are excellent, and when you go to sell those in the world stage, they do very, very well. And on the president of ISA's chart, he had fresh fruits were 6% of the exports. Well, fresh fruit exports really have just started up in the last few years. And I'm going to, oh, can you go back a couple slides? I told him to click every 15 seconds here. So there we go, right there. The production in Afghanistan is really, really good, but we didn't have the right volumes for exports. And so Roots of Peace started out, and we planted over 35,000 new orchards in the country. That's over 5 million trees. It's an area about the size of the District of Columbia. World Bank and some other programs also planted a lot of trees. So we have probably about 50,000 new orchards in the country with the right varieties for the export markets. And you can see some of the crops here, almonds, pomegranates. Next slide. The apples out of Logar and Wardak, the almonds, the Satarbais from the north. Grapes are phenomenal. These crops earn the best prices overseas. So the Shindukani grapes there, I think those are Shindukani. In Kabul, they're 70 cents. You get them down to Islamabad, it's $1.40. You get them into Delhi, it's over $3 a kilo. So exporting is a very profitable thing if you do the things necessary to get them there. Next slide. So over the last 10 years, we've been working with funding from USAID and other donors to help train the farmers on how to grow these crops the right way, grow them with high quality, how to process them, how to get dried apricots so they actually look like dried apricots. Next slide. Well, that's a Kishmish Kana that we designed to replace the mud ones. And you got double the yields on those, so we're getting a lot more of the green raisins coming out. The apple production is soaring now. But what we're doing now is you go to these international markets anyway, you need the right packaging. I think it was mentioned a couple of times. You got to have the right packaging. Our traders that we work with are almost all importing packaging from Pakistan and India. There's some production in Kabul. It's not the quality we need yet. We don't have the plastic clamshells. There's clear plastic ones for the apricots. We also use them for grapes. So there's a lot of packaging demand in the country. plus the cardboard boxes and other types of packaging. Next slide. Cold stores are also important. If you're going to ship containers, you have to queue up your fruit in a cold environment. In fact, when you harvest grapes, you have to pre-chill them and get them down to 2 degrees centigrade within 45 minutes. If you do that, then you put them in, keep them in the cold chain, they will stay fresh for 44 days. So we've got, these are grapes and apricots, a couple different locations. Next slide. Transportation is also key. This is a major problem. There are not enough reefer containers. We executed the first refrigerated shipment from Afghanistan to Karachi, I think it was, and then another one to Delhi. Now we have to hunt and to find to get the containers. So there's a logistics problem. There are basically very few freight forwarders in the country. Freight forwarders, real quickie, the other guys, if you say, I have a container here and I want to get to Delhi, they take care of everything in between. It just doesn't really exist in Afghanistan for some reason. It's everywhere else in the world. It's not in Afghanistan, and we need it. Next slide. Marketing's coming along very, very well. That's Gulf Food Show in Dubai. It's like the 4th or 5th time we've been there. This is the markets, the wholesale markets in India, specifically Delhi. We're now working directly with supermarkets, so you can get direct contracts. We're sending traders up, selling directly to the large supermarkets there. So the orders are going from 10 tons, 20 tons to 1,000 tons every couple of weeks. Next slide. So these are just the shipments that the USAID CHAMP program is focused on. And you can see when we first started out, the shipments and exports of fresh fruit to new markets. That's markets beyond Quetta and Peshawar. That's getting into Karachi, Dubai, Delhi, Ukraine, Kiev, Moscow, Europe. They're going up very fast. This last year, 2014, was 16,000 metric tons into new markets. 2015 blew it out of the water. It's approaching 100,000 metric tons, largely due to a lot of shipments of onions to India because there's floods in India, and the Afghan farmers and traders reacted very quickly for that. The Indians are smart. It's really good fruit, and they're buying it. The next slide. Now, one thing in those slides I just showed you, one thing that's missing from all of that is capacity. All those operations there, they were hand sorting, they were hand packing, small operations, small cold rooms. They don't have the ability to scale up. And what is needed is the ability to do the same thing, except to be able to do it in tens of thousands of tons a year by each trader. There are no super traders in Afghanistan. Roots Peace works all over the world, and in every country we work in, there's usually 5 to 10 super traders that dominate the exports. There's 0 in Afghanistan. There are some traders who think they're big, but they're not really executing at the high levels and exporting at the high levels that are possible. So there's a huge potential here. We've been pushing traders. They're getting bigger and bigger slowly. The market, the industry is growing very fast. As more fresh fruit are shipped out, the revenues are going to increase. Because if you ship out dry fruit, your raisins, the pricing you get on a raisin is about a quarter of what you would get as a fresh grape. And that holds pretty true for all fruits. So shipping fresh is a really, really good deal. And the other part is the value-add processing. Very little value-add processing is going on in Afghanistan. We ship whole pomegranates. Well, the markets in the world are shifting to pomegranates where the earls are already out of the container, basically, and they're already shelved for you, and you can just use them directly. A lot of other fruits are going that direction where there's processing going on with fresh fruit, and you use nitrogen inside the packaging so it keeps it nice and fresh. This technology needs to be adopted so that more value add can happen in Afghanistan, because people in Pakistan and India are doing that themselves and making that value add there. So I'll leave it with this. It says time. I was perfect on time. There's 2 people here that one, our former country director, Sharif Osman, if you'd raise your hand. He is probably the foremost expert on fresh fruit exports in Afghanistan. He's now working for us in California, but he still knows all about Afghanistan. And Dwayne Goodnose from around here. He was our first country director, chief of party. I don't know where he went. If you could raise. Dwayne knows a whole lot about Afghanistan as well. So good luck today.
There'll be a one-on-one table.
There'll be a one-on-one table, and Sharif's going to be there with me and get Dwayne also. Thank you.
It's a great honor to be here to present our ongoing work for the last 12 years in Afghanistan, tackling malnutrition. Our program is to develop agriculture for nutrition, and nutrition is our focus. Next slide. Actually, I had nothing to do with Afghanistan until 2002, when I heard that so many women and children are dying due to malnutrition. Because of malnutrition, which is synonymous with protein deficiency, Afghanistan had the world's highest maternal and infant mortality rates at childbirth. 1 in 50 women dying, 1 in 10 infants are dying at childbirth. Furthermore, surviving children were also at risk. 1 out of 4 children died before 5 years, and this was also the world's highest ranking. As a person trained in medical nutrition, I was compelled to do something, and not knowing what one man could do, I first decided to visit Afghanistan and see firsthand myself the severity of malnutrition. Having seen many children of underweight and stunted, and also some children are dying, the status of malnutrition of Afghanistan was far more severe than I expected. Next slide. Then what can be done to provide much needed protein to these populations who are so under-malnourished? One nutrition concept which was discovered during my first trip to Afghanistan. Although people had never heard or eaten soybeans before, we thought if we can train the farmers in high mortality areas on how they can cultivate and consume the harvested soybean at home, just like Korean, Chinese, and Japanese have been doing over 20 centuries, we may be able to help them save their women and children. That was the idea. What is special about soybean then? Soybean contains a high amount of protein with high proportion of 9 essential amino acids. We are calling soy protein as a complete protein because of the presence of 9 essential amino acids, which are comparable to animal proteins, such as beef and chicken and egg. But it costs only $2 to provide 1 kilogram of observable protein, which is cheaper by 10 to 15 times. Next slide. To tackle this nationwide malnutrition of the country, we had 2 strategies. Number 1 strategy was to build a self-sustainable soy industry. That is to develop a full value chain of soybean, starting from soybean seed production, soybean cultivation, soy processing factory establishment, and soy market development. Second strategy was to collaborate with Afghanistan government ministries, especially the Ministry of Agriculture. We have 5 working MOUs with the Ministries of Agriculture, Public Health, Women's Affairs, Education, and MRLD. Likewise, in all soy value chain development, Afghanistan government ministries have been supportive and efficient partners to NEI. Next. The first 5 years, 2006 through 2010, of soybean cultivation with farmers was very difficult, as a soybean was a brand new crop to Afghanistan. However, from 2011, thanks to the hard work by the extension agronomist at the provincial level of the Ministry of Agriculture, more farmers started joining to grow soybean for families' need for protein nutrition. We now have established soy farmers associations in 10 provinces, and also established 100 demonstration farms in 100 districts, so that farmers can learn from each other to produce a high-yield soybeans. This picture shows a field day event at a demonstration farm in Helmand province. Next slide. To date, we have trained more than 70,000 farmers in Afghanistan with input distribution. This year alone, we have trained more than 12,000 farmers, including 600 female farmers. And these farmers are from 100 districts of 22 provinces. This is a kind of a soybean map of the country. 22 provinces are growing soybean. White areas, due to the security, we cannot go there, and we hope that the situation will be improved soon. Afghan farmers have concluded this year, 2015, which was the 10th season of soybean production, with a record high 4,000 metric tons harvest, which was more than double from last year, a 100% increase. Next slide. This slide shows the farmers do with their harvest soybean. First, they select a healthy-looking soybean to use them as a seed for next year. And second, give a soybean to their wives so that she can cook for the families. Number three, whatever excess, they are selling to the market, including the soy factories around them. Production of soybean is one thing, but how to consume is another thing. This is an area where we have to offer assistance. The most common soy food they are making at home is a soy naan, made from the flour blend of 10% home ground soy flour and 90% of wheat flour blended together and make naan. We call it soy naan. It looks like and tastes like a regular naan, but it's a concentration of observable protein is more than double and can supply all the daily protein requirements as set by WHO to sustain and grow. Next slide. This slide, one more, before, go back to one. Yes. This is a little bit more detailed, but let me just quickly summarize, which shows the power of a soy naan over wheat naan. According to USDA, 60 kilogram body weight people, which is the average weight we are using for Afghans, does require ingestion of 1,530 milligrams of essential amino acid. But 3 times naan a day gives only 43% of what they need. That's why more than 60% of the entire population are chronically malnourished. More than 30% of children are stunted and underweight, and some of them are dying. However, when people eat soy naan 3 times a day, the supply of essential amino acid is go over 100%. That is the power of soy naan. Next slide. Because of the importance of soy flour, our initial target of a soy processing sector and market development effort in value chain is focused at soy mills establishment to produce a soy flour and market it to non-bakeries and general public. Next slide. Since 2007, we have established 7 soy factories of small to medium scale production in Nangarhar, Kapisa, and Kabul, Paruan, Taka, Kunduz, and Herat. And in addition to these 7 factories, we are planning to establish next year the first sterilized soy milk factory at Kabul, which can produce 40,000 packs a day of soy milk with 10 months shelf life. So nationwide marketing is possible because of a long shelf life. We also plan to build a texturized soy protein, which is a vegetable meat, at Herat, and 2 more soy flour factories at Helmand and Zhaozhen. Next slide. No, before, go back one more. Okay, this okay. So after, next slide. After our 12 years of work in collaboration with the ministries of agriculture and other ministries, and also private sector and farmers, 2 soy facts have been established in Afghanistan. Number 1 fact is that soybean grows well in Afghanistan. The question is not whether or not soybean can grow well in Afghanistan, but which varieties can grow well in which ecological zones of Afghanistan. We have some answers to that question. Number 2 fact is that Afghan people love soy food. Soy naan and soy kurma are very popular. NEI is now promoting 14 national soy recipes to the general public. With these 2 soy factories established over the last decade, we are now committing another decade to expedite soy value chain development toward our goal, production of soybean and processing and consuming 300,000 tons of soybean every year to defeat protein, energy, malnutrition. This translates to 100,000 metric tons of observable protein, which is deficient to the 30 million people population of Afghanistan. It might be possible that Afghanistan can be the first country to eradicate malnutrition by themselves through creating Afghan-style soy value chain for Afghans and by Afghans. Thank you.
I've worked in Afghanistan since 2011 with the U.S. military in Kabul, Badakhshan, and Wardak provinces. And by knowing some of you ladies and gentlemen here, I realized early on the power of the private sector to improve the lives of Afghans. And I felt that as an international community, especially as the U.S. military, we were kind of missing this, this important element to achieving stability in Afghanistan. So flash forward 3 years later in 2014, I'm working with farmers in Wardak province, and I see the same problem that I've seen in other industries and other places in Afghanistan, is that these farmers are growing some excellent products, but are unable to reach markets outside of their districts. At best, they're selling it province-wide. And I thought, you know, there's an opportunity here. If we can connect rural farmers with the international market, we can not only give them a way to profit, we will incentivize them to increase their production on their own. So this is not aid in the old sense of handing out new equipment or you know, just giving handouts. It's trading value for value. And when they see a return on their investment, they'll on their own increase their production. So we met a farmer named Haji Yosef. Next slide, please. Sorry, this is our this is our team. We're all a team of military veterans who all observe the same issues in Afghanistan. Next slide, please. And we met a farmer named Haji Yosef who worked in Wardak province growing saffron. And I didn't know anything about saffron until I met Haji Yosef. And come to find out, saffron, as many of you know, is grown in Afghanistan, competes at the highest levels internationally. For the last 3 years, it was named the top international, top saffron at the International Taste and Quality Institute. Haji Yosef was trying to sell his saffron on the world market, so we wanted to help him. We wanted to help him reach international markets and increase his own production. Next slide, please. So I spoke to my partners, Kim and Emily, who were both at Harvard Business School at the time. Kim came to Afghanistan as a civilian, and we met with Haji Yosef, and we went to Herat province, where, as many of you know, saffron is primarily grown. And we met with a number of farmers in Herat province and explored the opportunities of exporting this saffron onto the international market. Next slide, please. You know, saffron had been grown in Herat for 10 to 15 years, but it had been also exported through Iran, but nothing was being branded as an Afghan product. It was being sold primarily to traders who would sell it as an Iranian product or, you know, Pakistani, Dubai, what have you. Our goal was to use saffron, this very high quality spice, to introduce the Afghan brand to the international market. We wanted people to associate Afghanistan with something other than, war and the last 30 years of conflict that they've experienced, so that through saffron we can open up other markets, dried fruits and nuts, other agricultural products and other products that Afghanistan can produce. We can get that into the international markets. So some of the challenges, as been discussed here, is maintaining a high quality and maintaining the quality demanded by U.S. consumers and U.S. buyers in particular. In order to do this, you have to have processing that meets FDA requirements. So we funded a processing center in Herat to do just that. Next slide, please. And over the last year, we hired approximately 200 workers to process saffron in our processing center, where we could maintain quality and we could provide the quality assurance checks that the international market demands. Not only are we providing economic incentive to the farmers who we're purchasing the saffron from, we're also hiring a number of women laborers that work in our factories and providing a bit of economic incentive for them too. So we're trying to move more of the value-added activity to Afghanistan. At this point, we are exporting just the raw saffron product, but over time we want to do the packaging in Afghanistan once we can solve some of the logistical issues and move more of the value-added activity to Afghanistan. Next slide, please. We started with the premise that by providing a market for Afghan products, we could incentivize economic development. And we've been right in that premise thus far. We started over a year ago with 10 farmers and approximately 20 kilograms of saffron. And this year we will import approximately 100 kilograms of saffron, and we will reach 40 to 50 farmers within our network, not including the smaller farmers that we buy just 1 kilogram or 2 from them. And this is not through us coercing them or giving handouts. It's strictly a value trade. They see an incentive in growing saffron, and from one year to the next, they've doubled and tripled their production. And we have farmers knocking on our door every day to join our enterprise. This is exactly what we want to see. As many of you know, approximately a third of the arable land in Afghanistan is used for growing. There's tremendous potential to increase the agricultural production in Afghanistan. 85% of the population is connected economically to agriculture in one way or another. And this is what we like to see. On another note, saffron is an excellent alternative to opium production. It's grown in the very similar climates, and it has dollar for dollar a greater value for the farmer than opium. And by the way, it's not an illegal crop as opium is. So many farmers are more than happy to switch to saffron production, and we hope that as we continue to increase the demand in the international market, we can bring more and more farmers into our network, and we can suppress the spread of opium cultivation. Next slide, please. This year, for the first time, we're seeing the saffron industry in Herat formalize some of the mechanisms that you need as an industry to compete on the international market. This year they held a saffron festival for the first time. They've also issued licenses to saffron producers, which of course we're a member of the union and a licensed producer. This is the first step into standardizing the saffron production across the board, not just with our company, but with other people wishing to export. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just want to say it's great to see everybody here representing Afghanistan's private sector. As I said, I truly believe it's the private sector that will lead the way to creating peace and stability in Afghanistan. And seeing all you here, I'm very optimistic about Afghanistan's future. And I believe that by connecting Afghanistan with the international market, we can cultivate peace and provide stability and a strong future for the country. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Chris Vadu. I am the Director of International Expansion at EDI USA. We are a private sector corporation based in Philadelphia, and we manufacture technologies in the healthcare, agriculture, and defense and security industries. We work in about 26 countries around the world, specifically in South America, the Middle East, Asia, as well as in Afghanistan. Next slide, please. For those of you who are familiar with agribusiness and large-scale agricultural production, the use of equipment and other large machinery is essential for agribusiness to develop and to take off. I'm not talking about small-scale family farming or small agricultural projects. I'm talking about large agribusiness, agricultural factories that produce agricultural products for domestic as well as export. And in order for these products to be marketable and to essentially turn a profit at the end of the day, large machinery is necessary. Right now, Afghanistan needs technology to grow its agribusiness sector. Our corporation, EDI, is partnering with the Afghan government as well as an array of private sector organizations and companies, some of you may be in this room, in Afghanistan to import large-scale machinery to jumpstart and kick off agribusiness and further develop it in Afghanistan. We manufacture traditional farming equipment like tractors, plows, and tillers, harvesters, but we're also trying to use technology in Afghanistan to advance agribusiness and to modernize and optimize the agricultural infrastructure in the country. For example, we are initiating a project right now that uses GPS tracking technology to monitor agricultural patterns and to optimize harvesting. We use 3D printing technology to supply spare parts for equipment in hard-to-reach areas of Afghanistan as well as in many other countries. We're using multilingual technology to train farmers on how to use new agricultural technologies and to work and profit from agribusiness. Now, Afghanistan, like many other countries in the region, presents challenges to business, and I'm sure many of the individuals in this room have experienced these challenges firsthand, just as our company has. In terms of agriculture specifically, many people say that there may be, too many challenges to overcome in Afghanistan in order to effectively implement large-scale agricultural infrastructure. A small amount of arable land, the current political situation in the country are common citations of that, and these are realities that certainly do exist in Afghanistan. I think we would be lying if we tried to ignore these challenges to business. However, with technology and with effective private sector companies and individuals partnering within the country, similar to what we're doing, I'm confident that many of these challenges can be addressed in quite an organized way. The next slide, please. So, to wrap up, the next slide, please. Thank you. To wrap up, Afghanistan's future, in my opinion, can be predicted within the next decade, or actually, I would say this current decade. I'm confident that private sector actors will continue to advance and move into Afghanistan, similar to what we've been doing there for the past few years. And technology, specifically agricultural and mechanized technology, will continue to enter the country. And at the end of the day, I think we'd be lying to say that money does not drive agriculture. There is a lot of profit and economic development that comes with agriculture, both on an individual level and as a state level. And like I'm sure many of you in this room are doing right now, when public agencies partner with private agencies who know local business well, results are created and large-scale agribusiness can develop in the country. And I'm sure we'll see that continuing within this decade. Thank you.
And really what I'd just like to highlight for 2 minutes is what you've heard from the panelists really are a whole set of really challenges, but really opportunities, right? This is an enormous field. Agriculture is incredibly important to Afghanistan, as all of you know, and provides real opportunity. I work for USAID right now. We have been supporting the agriculture sector in Afghanistan since we came into the country in 2012. And I want to say, 2002. And really, all along, what in the agricultural sector we would call the value chain. So this is the production, this is the marketing, this is the processing, this is the credit. This is at all stages of this value chain. I think my job now is to ask you, to ask the private sector to invest in this sector, because this is where there's real opportunity available. I would encourage you to speak with all of our panelists during the networking sessions, and I think there's quite a bit to learn. I'd like to, just to stay on time, I think we'd like to move on to our next. Jeff, Don wants.
I think this audience might be interested in what AID is doing in Afghanistan today. For example, the Rural Agriculture Development Program, there's an East, West, North, and South. The CHAMPS program was mentioned earlier. Could you give a brief summary of the group? Thanks, Chris.
So, Don loves putting me on the spot. So yes, very briefly. I mentioned kind of these different components of the value chain, whether it's production, marketing, processing. Those parts of the value chain are the parts of the value chain that USAID has been supporting in different shapes since 2002. Don referenced our regional agricultural development programs, which are in 3 different regions of the country now, and hopefully soon in all 4 regions, north, south, east, and west. And these projects are very much focused not only in the production, but also the processing and to some extent the marketing of agricultural products. And this is one very important area for Afghanistan, of course, that is getting farmers to produce at higher yield levels with higher quality, being able to take those materials, process them in a way that, as some of our speakers have noted, meet international standards, that go into proper packaging materials that can be exported, that meet phytosanitary standards. This is very important. USAID is also supports a number of different credit programs. Credit is incredibly important to agriculture, and as you well appreciate, it is one of the most difficult areas to provide credit in. Sometimes banks are least likely to go into the ag sector for its known risk. I think if you ask a farmer in the United States, they always say, well, we have one great year and we have one okay year, and then one year is lousy. Well, that's the kind of the norm for agriculture, right? It is a long-term gain, a long-term game, but it is also a long-term opportunity. And I would urge you again to take this sector treat it with great importance. It is the sector that is employing roughly, as other people have noted, roughly 3/4 of the Afghan population. Let me hit on very briefly, we mentioned the credit program. I'd like to call out Gary's program on horticulture. You are well familiar with the fact that some of the most important crops that Afghanistan has historically exported are the dried fruits and nuts as well as fresh fruit. Afghanistan is rightly famous for the quality of some of its products, and there's real opportunity there. Whether this is pomegranates, almonds, raisins, I think Gary could talk your ear off for as long as you know. To the point about saffron, absolutely. All of these crops that I have just mentioned, also a very viable alternative to poppy production in Afghanistan. This is a very significant problem, as you know. These crops that we've mentioned are more valuable, and I'm sure Gary will back me up, on a per acre basis. It's unbelievable. We think that poppy somehow dominates the countryside and there are no other choices. Nothing could be further from the truth, and I would urge you to investigate some of these other crops. I'm more than happy, to speak with you offline, but I think just for time's sake, I think I will ask Jeff to come up, thank our panel, and we move on to the next. Thanks very much.